Why don't we move into the article on the 4 strategies by Fred Nichols. Nichols. What do you guys think? First of all, I hate all the titles, like imperative, redundant. I mean, it's just such an academic thing. But beyond that, did everybody identify with some of the conditions that they were referring to?
It's pretty helpful the way that it broke it out by like the situations where it applied to as well, because you could kind of tie it back to the case.
Yep.
You know, and see which situation might have applied.
Exactly. Yep. I mean, and of course, we'll find that there's really no one perfect. Like, you can't diagnose a situation and say, oh, well, that's definitely this one. Like, it's always a combination, but it helps to understand when one is maybe more preferred than the other. Yeah, so why don't we just go through some of it. So the first one, this empirical rational. I try to distill down the main points. People are rational beings and will follow their self-interest once it is revealed to them. Successful change is based on the communication of information and the offering of incentives. Explain the facts, and people will change their behavior. It's difficult to employ when the incentives are modest or there's not a perception that the current situation is bad. And either way, you need converts to help spread the word. So what type of conditions did the article suggest this type of strategy would work? Does anybody remember?
I think in a less critical situation, this will work.
Yep, that's right. So if you need radical change, this is probably not one that would work that well. What if what if you're new? What if you're a new manager? Does this one work well? Probably not, because you probably don't have the respect that you need. People will look at you as an outsider, and again, especially if you haven't built that urgency. What about if the scope is wide? You know, it's a big corporation compared to one clothing store. Does that play any difference into this one?
Yeah.
In which way?
This logic speaks to a wider population, and when you have organizational change, you want rationale to be on your side.
But is it easier to communicate the rational thought to a few people or to an organization of 10,000?
It would be harder to communicate, and that's where the other strategies are going to come in and how you do the communication. But if your rationale and incentives are not aligned with your strategy, then it's not going to work.
Easier for you. Like, I think when you think of rational, it's easier to get to a few people, convince them of something, and get them on board. This reminded me of the SPCA commercials with the Sarah McLachlan song. That's not rational, but think of how many people, like, you see that and you turn the channel, it motivates you for something.
Well, yeah, you need the converts. You need to convince a few, and then hope that they can then cascade that down.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback what you were saying about the idea of rational to like smaller amounts of people rather than larger. Because I think depending on your function, that rationale actually would look a little bit different. So sometimes it's challenging to provide like blanket rationale to an organization that's very large because the logic between why things are done may look different down at the function level.
Yeah, for sure. Brian, you had something?
Back to the last week, like we're talking about the CEO handing down the change at the plant or lower manager levels where it needs to come in.
Yep. Yeah, that's absolutely. And you guys you probably know, you've experienced it, or you will, that logic isn't what necessarily motivates people as much as. So, to me, this is the most common change management myth, is that you can approach a problem this way. I think this is what, especially MBA types, analytical types, this is what we think. Hey, if I make a well-argued and thoroughly researched argument and I put together a PowerPoint with a bunch of graphs and slides showing income projections and I present that to a bunch of other smart, rational people, then everyone's going to say, yes. And I've never found that to be true. But I think that's the classic trap, is that you just assume that, you know, you come in with fresh ideas and you lay it out there, people will just pick up on it. Also, this rational, by definition rational, you're not presenting your arguments in the context of anyone's feelings. And as much as, again, MBA types maybe don't think this way, as we learned last week with the overweight patients, that's how you got them to change, was talk to their feelings. Don't just tell them, if you don't change your diet and you don't stop smoking and you don't start exercising, you're going to have this massive heart disease. That was factual. That's what the doctors were trying to do. And it shocked them to know that a year later, 70% of the patients had gone back to their old ways, because the rational, empirical way didn't touch on anyone's emotions or their feelings. So big trap. And again, in this context, I think you really need to focus on creating that urgency. And again, if you do it in a rational way, sometimes, you know, the feeling of urgency is that it's a feeling, right? You have to touch those pressure points to know, to get people to sense it. And so I would caution you all very much about this strategy. I don't think it tends to work that much. I think it could work in, you know, who here works for DuPont? Someone work for DuPont?
Kevin, who's not here.
Kevin. Like in a engineering type company, or you know, an architecture, or, you know, it's an engineering company, with a bunch of really analytical people who might be a little bit low on the feeling scale, this might be okay. Maybe Bikram with some doctors, maybe. I would still say they're human beings, so the emotions and the feelings is part of it too, but there are some selected places where this can work, but I would say be very careful of this. As much as it fits with a lot of our mentalities and thinkings in this class, take it from me, I haven't found it to work that well. All right, this next one, the normative re-educative. A terrible name, terrible name. Anyway, this one says that people want to conform and fit in, and that if you change the culture or what is accepted, people will fall in line. This strategy requires persuasive and charismatic leaders, and it also needs a strong culture, like a strong, as I say, informal system of self-policing. That if someone starts to step out of line culturally or behaviorally, the culture swoops in and takes care of it. Does anybody work for a company kind of like this? I would think Whole Foods would be a bit like this, maybe. Or it has anyone? Yeah, Brian?
We're 100% employee owned, so it's
Okay.
kind of a tight culture.
So there's a lot of accountability amongst each other, because if someone...
You affect my bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Ivy?
I think sales organizations. So I work for Altria, but I started my career in a sales type role.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of think about this idea of people want to kind of fit in and be part of the team. And just the leadership style is very kind of charismatic, kind of very friendly.
Yep.
That kind of brought people in and motivated people to change behaviors or work on business initiatives.
Yeah, I think at Altria they think this is what they're doing, but maybe they're doing a little more of the coercive. But I think that top management might think that this is what they're doing.
Sarah?
We have a supervisor that doesn't know we say this, but he gets up there and does a big speech, and we all whisper, what he means to say is align or die. That, like, you need to come into alignment. And it took all these mushy words like being together, but they mean align with what we're doing. And we have this thing where we need to fit in. So we have buzzwords where if the presenter or anyone says it, the whole audience has to do a certain thing.
Ooh.
So one of the words is, if someone says the word enthusiasm, the whole room needs to shout enthusiasm with enthusiasm. And it's so ingrained that if you miss it, it's like, you didn't say it, Audrey. It's like this culture where even if you weren't happy to be there, if all the boss needs to do is say the word enthusiasm, and the whole room has to come awake in that moment.
I'm gonna sneak up behind you and whisper enthusiasm. And see.
You've already done it twice today, and I've flinched.
Really?
You've done it twice.
I like that you counted.
Yeah.
I noticed.
I can't wait to find out what the other buzzwords are. I'll just happily blah 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 synergies, and Sarah's like, oh, synergies. You know.
Stop it.
Anything? No. Julie, you've been quiet so far. What do you think? Oh, I just yanked it off.
I feel like I'm listening. I don't have an example of having worked in a place where this was that strong. So.
But what about within like a department? Could this be, so let's jump ahead. So, I mean, to me, this is a slow process, right? If you want everyone just to change their behavior, it sort of has to happen one at a time. The top leaders or the managers, the department managers, really must be the ones that lead the example. So they have to have total buy-in. If 4 out of 5 people in your, so let's just say, bad example, but what if you guys say, you know, we have to close our books by the 5th day of the month, but in this department we're going to get it done on the 4th day because we're going to be top in class. It's not a rule, no one has to do it, but we're just going to do it. And then let's say 4 of the 5 managers say great, and 1 says I don't think so. If that one person defects and everyone else behind them says, oh well, if Tom doesn't think so, then it must be okay to not do it. So you need total unity, I think, in many cases. And it's been my experience that this strategy should not be used for really critical functions. So big change programs or urgent situations. This one is not correct. I think on a small scale, on things that aren't real critical, I think this one could be okay. I kept thinking about your genes policy. You know, I think you're, so for example, we kind of had the opposite problem when I came into my job. People would literally wear like sweatpants to work. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. This is a professional office and you guys look like slobs. And I didn't come in and just say anything, but I started dressing even more, I literally would wear, a suit every day. Not all the time with a tie, but I mean, my previous boss would come in jeans and boots and stuff, and I said, no, we want to change that. So then I started dressing a little more professionally, and then I had one other guy who I basically said, hey, start dressing professionally. And then he started doing it, and then, without really even saying anything, 6 months later, it was pretty cleaned up. So that was one where I guess people said, well, if the boss is dressing up, then maybe we need to dress up. Any other examples where, did that trigger anything with anybody? Can you think of some other examples where a behavioral thing set in?
I'll speak up a little bit. So I work for the University of Richmond, so we're constantly having these orientations and stuff where the bigwigs all get together and sort of just convey our culture, and it's slowly changed over time.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about...
How long have you been here, by the way, just so I...
10 years altogether.
Okay.
7 in a row.
Okay.
And then when I actually got a promotion and went down to a satellite location, which is off campus, which is completely different.
Yep.
Just night and day. And so I guess you could say I sort of slowly have been implementing, bringing the campus mentality to it, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but
sure.
People are like, it was very sort of edgy and jagged, I don't know, very coercive at first, and it's sort of mellowed out a little bit. I don't know if that's good or bad. It seems more in line with what I see as the whole university norm now. It's a slow process.
Does anybody work for a company that has a customer service department? I mean, but especially if you're a manufacturing type company, which I mean, at the end of the day, I guess Altria truly is a manufacturing company. Sometimes there's some tension between manufacturing and sales, right? They're all about productivity and efficiencies, and these guys are all about making customers happy. So sometimes those two goals.
Our front staff is hired from hotel industry. They don't have any knowledge about medical. So what they do is patients, they keep putting patients, not realizing that we are not selling cookies. That this is patient care, human care. It takes time. So that in order to make patients happy, they sometimes overbook our schedule. And physicians are not happy. They are always loggerheads. And they argue. They said we are in service industry. We have to make them happy. And physicians say, I understand, but still, at the end of the day, this is the patient we have to care about. Don't overbook us. So, there's constant.
Yeah.
Hustle.
So, but I think the point is then that depending on what whoever your leader is, if that person takes a viewpoint, if that person says, no, we are a customer or patient first place, so therefore we have to do this, or maybe the opposite, we are here to please the customers. So, but whatever that person decides, it has to trickle through the organization. That you can't just put out a memo saying stop taking care of patients, but the way they starts behaving, it should start sending that signal to everybody, and then people try to join in with that.
So most physicians feel there's a difference in perception. They said the higher authority, the CEOs, CMOs, they're saying that they are providing value-based care. But physicians think they are not providing value. We are providing volume-based care. So there's a disconnect between
Yeah,
perception.
that's true.
And it's hard to build that gap. It's hard to get them on the same page.
Audrey?
I would just say a small example is so where I work for VCU, everyone comes to meetings like 10 minutes late. And when I first got there, I was there 5 minutes early, and I was just kind of waiting around. And for probably the first 3 to 4 months, I was always early. But because no one else ever adopted that behavior, it's like the opposite effect. Now I just show up 10 minutes late because everyone else does.
You fit in.
Because, yeah.
I can think of an example that we fly overseas a lot. I go to Europe 4, 5, 6 times a year. I go to the Middle East or Asia once or twice a year. And my sales managers do the same, and some of my finance people do the same. And I mean, we'll easily spend $100,000 a year on overseas tickets. I mean, forget domestic travel, just going overseas for a small group, that's a lot of money. Because, to go to London on a business class ticket is $5,000. I mean, a coach class ticket is $700, and then so to go from economy to business is a huge gap. And so at one point I just said, this is ridiculous. This is like a 6-hour flight. Yes, you're trying to sleep, but you can go over a day early and you can get there and you can get rested. So, is your rear end that valuable that it's going to cost us $4,300 more to do this? So I just started flying economy. And I would go on the same plane as colleagues who were, below me in the organization. They were up front, and I was back in the back. I didn't say anything. I didn't shame them or make them feel bad, but just it kind of became known that Matt flies economy when he goes overseas. And then, sure enough, other people started flying economy. Now I fly business again. Ha ha ha. No. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I mean, I really try to price it out. But that was one where people just started looking at how others were acting, and if everyone was flying business, no one would even flinch. Oh, just sign the $5,000, but once somebody started doing something different, people thought, maybe I ought to fall in line and not make the boss look bad. So that's kind of how this one works. All right, the next one, this is kind of a fun one, the power coercive one. People do what they're told, and through the exercise of authority, people will comply. This is these are my words, I think maybe the article said it, my way or the highway style of management, or the iron fist style. And this is a more traditional hierarchical approach. And as we talked about earlier, some countries and cultures embrace this more than others. US companies tend to embrace this. European companies do not. Chinese ones, sounds like maybe they do a bit more. Brazilian ones, maybe. But European one, I shouldn't say European. German, yes, German's very hierarchical. Scandinavian, not at all. This would fail terribly. Does anybody work for or have worked for one of these?
I once had a manager at my current company say that he wants to beat his employees with a carrot. So we have incentives, but we're going to beat you with them so you're coerced to do what you're supposed to. And you don't know if you like it or not, so you'll always stay.
Sounds like the manager of the year. Yeah, Vikram.
When I was in residency, our medical director was very strict. What she did, she said public hanging is okay. What does she mean is, one resident always come late. So she locked the door one day. He opened, he said, okay, don't open the door. Then this is like lesson for him. And next time, all the residents were coming on time, or even him, he started on his. So she said, one time here and there, public hanging is okay. So that it's a lesson for others.
That's a power move, locking the door. Yeah, Julian.
I have my previous company that I no longer work for. They do sales, and so they're trying to generate volume for their hospital. But at the same time, they also have to fill out these assessments for these patients that they recruited. They recently came out with a new policy saying that your assessment has to be 100% compliant, or else they're going to do random audits, and after 4 audits, you're going to be sacked. Yeah, and it placed such a burden on these salespeople that they spent hours on these freaking assessments instead of generating volume.
Sure.
So it's like a game that they're trying to balance.
Yes, Ivy.
I'm going to say too, like, not to take the conversation in a different direction, but I kind of feel like this strategy is a little gendered.
Okay.
I think men...
It's a dude strategy.
Yeah, I think men tend to take this strategy a little bit more in corporate
For sure.
America.
Yeah, for sure.
And when women take this strategy, they're called like a bitch, or, you know, like, people might try to kind of dismiss them or demote them. But yeah.
No, I think you're, of course.
I think that this is sort of like a gendered strategy, that you may see this more in men than women.
That might depend on your field. I can tell you in the construction industry, the women that are in, you know, power positions in the construction industry, every day of the week.
Yeah.
That's
Jason.
So I can't speak, so I'll kind of piggyback off of that. So it's not a company I work for, but my wife is a operations manager in the Custom Distribution Center in Northern Glen. So she's got like 130 people on her team. And she went into the role taking more of a, you know, get to know everybody, be nice to everybody, you know, just get along. It's turned out that some of the employees are just problem employees. And, you know, there are all these obstacles to firing people. So I was like, hey, if their supervisors aren't doing what they're supposed to do, hold them accountable, and then find a way to get them out the door and bring in somebody who's more qualified. But that's not really an option for her. So she's recently started taking a more coercive approach. And so far she's seen pretty good results with it. But it's completely different from her nature, right? So she naturally trends towards more of an affiliative type approach.
Sure.
But yeah, so it's been interesting to see the transition, the impact that it can even have on somebody who, while it's best for the situation, it's not comfortable for her. So, you know, it's kind of interesting. There's two sides to it, right? Even though it's best for the company.
Well, and I mean, this can be done in the right way or the wrong way. If you're yelling and you're intimidating people and you're literally pounding your fist, or you're publicly embarrassing people, that's not so great. But if you're very clear and very direct, and you just inform people to say, this is the direction we're going, and I need my team to be on the same page as me, you know, there's a good, so this is a change strategy. What do you guys think? I mean, it's a little bit old school, it's a little bit, you know, guy-oriented maybe. I would argue this fellow Bob Lutz in this book was kind of in this camp, but I mean, is this just outdated? I mean, is this not a valid change strategy anymore, or can it be?
So what would that mean in the context of the case that we read, where he was the, you know, highest ranking person in the store, and he told people what they needed to do, and yet they still didn't do it? So, I mean, we talked about the fact that the incentive, that, you know, sort of, this is carrot and stick, and I think they talked in this about this is the stick side of it, but I think if you're not, it's the follow through on the stick part that actually gets the change. Just saying to do it doesn't mean everyone will do it until they see that someone has suffered the consequences, in which case they, oh, well, maybe I will move forward with the change.
Yeah, he needed to publicly hang somebody, maybe.
So
feel like I feel like there's an example that everyone would recognize, but I can't come up with it right now. But I'll think about it. But
that just reminds me of our annual compliance report. And so everybody, by those giggles, everybody knows what I'm talking about. And so we will have let people go during the year, but for HR reasons and confidentiality reasons, they can't tell us why. So at the end, when we get the report, we try to figure out why the people we know are gone.
yeah.
But it's generally so vague, you still can't tell. So it's like those could be examples to us of what not to do, but they don't tell us what it was.
Right.
So,
Right.
that maybe was just a random thought.
Yeah, Audrey.
How would you get the leverage to use this tactic if you worked in an industry, like I think the same, where it's really hard to fire, so you can't really follow up on your my way or the highway thing? Does it have to be paired with some type of consequence, or is it more just how you assert your expectations?
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would. So getting someone fired is really challenging, but the best way to do that from a power coercive.
I like the lawyer in the room is shaking his head.
Is this idea of documentation. So like, you state what you're expecting to see and why you want to see it, and what will happen if they don't do it is you're going to document. And then once you have a paper trail of documentation, that's when you can get to the point, and that's where you sort of have that consequence here, where you can kind of be power coercive, but like in a female way, to me, in my experiences. And you provide that documentation, and you have those conversations documented about them and their performance, and you bring it to HR, and then that's where you can get to the point where you can fire them.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you need a document. I've found it's actually very easy to fire people, but generally,
depending on your company,
but generally you pay them. Generally, you pay them off. Generally, you pay them a healthy exit fee, and you get them to sign a release that they won't come back and sue you. Yeah. Yeah, that's generally how you do it. But the issue is that everyone's in a class now, right? Age, gender, disability, everything. And so the challenge is that if you treat somebody some way and then someone differently later, it opens up the door to. We had a case where, we had an employee punch someone in the parking lot, and it was a young white guy, and we liked him, and he thought he was a good employee, but we said, unfortunately, got to fire him, because if a 50-year-old woman, which I can't imagine a 50-year-old woman punching someone in the parking lot, but if it happened and then we fired her but not him, then we look like we. So, you just have to treat everybody the same way and not open up the door. I mean, at the end of the day in business, that's the risk, is that you just open up the door to lawyers come in. So no offense to lawyers, but, they charge an expensive hourly rate. So just want to avoid even getting them involved. But this one, let me push to the next. This one can be effective if there's a really short deadline, something super urgent. Companies are failing sometimes, and they bring in these turnaround specialists. These guys use this all the time, and they're usually quite clear. They say, folks, this business is running out of cash, and if in the next 45 days we don't turn around, we're out of business and you're out of jobs. So I'm here. I have special wartime powers, and we're going to just do it. And when you present it like that, a lot of people say, okay, do what you can. If it's that bad and we're going to lose our jobs anyway, then let's try it. So if there's a short deadline or the consequences of not changing are severe, this type of strategy can work. And it usually can work very fast. If you have one person who's in a power position and has authority and it can just implement immediate changes, effective immediately, we are going to, give customers a 10% discount. I mean, if you can just across the board make a psh, you will see some results quickly. And usually it generates some short-term wins. And when you do that, you start to gain momentum. You start to gain enthusiasm. Hey, Audrey came in here with her, and she shook things up. And look, now we just made our monthly budget this month. So hey, maybe this strategy works. So This can work, but it depends on the culture. Is the culture ready to accept it? I would argue that at the clothing and accessory store, that culture probably wasn't ready for it, because I just don't think they had that. And also, they didn't know that there was any sort of real burning platform. And this is my opinion. This may have some short-term staying power, but for me, it's really more about the employees and the whole organization taking ownership of the new vision and of the changes. And so when a strong, sometimes charismatic leader comes in and just starts dictating the change, people will go along with it. And if it means, hey, this is great and our stock price is up and we're making more money, and people will go along with it. But sometimes if you take that person out, then the whole thing falls apart, because now you don't have someone in place who can keep that momentum. The employees never really bought into it themselves. They never took full ownership of it. So this one's a little bit risky. So for me, I would argue this one can be used in a real turnaround situation.
That's what I was about to say, is that you'll see a lot of times where companies are in, they're really in peril, and then they'll bring somebody in, they'll call them the turnaround guy.
Yeah.
And they'll come in and be kind of finger in your face, turn the place around, and then he'll leave voluntarily with a great paycheck from the board, I'm sure. And then somebody else will come in who's more, kind of builds the relationships and vision and long-term sustainability.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think being labeled a turnaround specialist gives you a little bit of that runway where people say, well, we know why you're here, so go ahead, get on with it, bring it on, So the last one, I'm going to try to run through this pretty quick. Environmental adaptive. This is what I call the clean slate method. It essentially promotes that you create a whole new organization and staff it with people that you want and form a culture that you need, and then slowly transfer over from the old organization those that you think would be a good fit. The new organization is usually given a high priority and a lot of resources, and successes are visible to everyone else and they're celebrated. And the end result is that the old organization is starved of resources, the undesired people tend to leave, and eventually the new organization, the vibrant, new, successful organization, just ends up consuming the old one and bringing it into their culture. And this is an effective strategy if you're entering a new line of work or a new industry or a new region. It allows for total cultural transformation, and oftentimes you relocate to somewhere new just to get that geographical separation. And I've found that that's actually a good, if you want to get rid of some people, relocate, because most of them probably don't want to leave, and if you do, you just don't offer them a relocation opportunity. I feel like last class, Altria, Stephanie was telling me about the new building with like the smokeless tobacco group and how
The new mark team.
Yeah, and it sounded very much like this. That keep kicking the damn thing. They wanted the kind of it's a different target market, right? It's a younger crowd, so they wanted kind of a hip work environment. So the offices had ping pong tables or something, and maybe that's not right, but people could wear jeans early.
Everybody else goes.
And
yeah.
so that was an example of maybe rather than try to create an organization within the framework of kind of an older organization, just start fresh. New building, off-site, or across the street.
They had their own floor. And I guess, was it originally a joint venture, or we bought the company? So some of the people came with it, and then selectively people from Altria have been placed in it.
Okay, so it sounds like they're
And then
trying this.
I think eventually those people will come back in to Altria
Mhm.
and maybe bring what they've learned from that organization with them.
Anybody else had any examples of this one? It can be on a whole company-wide basis. It can also be within a department. It could be, for example, I do business with a customer that's got a headquarters down in Cary, North Carolina. So that's in that Raleigh-Durham triangle. And they are a windows manufacturer. They were headquartered in Kansas City for legacy reasons I don't know, and they just decided that they wanted a whole new transformation. So I think they hired a consultant, they did a big thing, and they came up with a bunch of cities, and they chose Cary. So you can imagine that they relocated top management, but not a lot of the support staff, and then they rehired in North Carolina. And that allowed them to completely go through the process. And so they ran dual organizations for a couple years, because you can't just lay everybody off in Kansas City. I mean, that was all the back office and the contract administration. But then they slowly built up this new organization, and then eventually closed the Kansas City one down. And to me, in my mind, this was exactly this. They just wanted a completely fresh start. They were called, Tillerson Windows, and now they're called Ply Gem. It's like they changed the name, they changed the logo, they changed the brand, they changed the location, they changed the culture, they changed everything by relocating.
This might be a variation on this. It wasn't really a clean slate, but we went through a restructuring last year, and the new vice president of procurement, who had he might actually still have finance on it, but he, I guess, didn't like how procurement was going, and so he seeded people from finance into that organization, and a lot of the procurement people went away.
Okay.
So not exactly the
No,
same.
it's a variation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I would say is, when you diagnose a company or diagnose your situation, and you start to think about what type of strategy might work better, I think you need to keep in mind a couple things. Is the degree of change radical or less radical? If it's radical, go for the power coercive, or maybe this last one, the environmental adaptive. If it's not radical, maybe the first two would be a bit better. What do you think will be the degree of resistance, strong or weak? Again, know your audience. Can the power coercive thing work with your audience? Yes or no? If yes, okay, it can be effective and quick. If not, don't try it. How is the population? Is it big or small? So, what is the communication challenge on a big company versus one department, for example? Are the stakes high or low? Is the company on the verge of going out of business? Then, again, it's something that's going to take a lot shorter. Same way, the time frame. How long is your change process going to be? What is your expertise? Is it high or low? Do you have respect? If you're the change manager, if you're the integration manager or the change leader, do you have respect? Oliviera didn't seem to have respect, so that power coercive doesn't really work if you have no respect. If he has respect, then maybe it does. Bob Lutz had respect, so he was able to do it. And this is an idea we didn't really talk about, but dependency. It's a little bit about who needs who more. So, this is kind of that Weebies I was talking about. If people perceive that you're just, young MBA type coming in and on some training program, and after 2 years you're gone anyway, then they don't really need you. So they can ignore you, and they can probably do a pretty good job of making your life pretty challenging.
Quick question. So it seems like there's only these four, but I mean, how about what we talked about last week with like getting shared vision and fostering consensus and spreading revitalization? What does that fall under? Because it's not the second one. I don't know.
Well, that's more the actual not strategy. Those are more
execution.
Your execution, your implementation strategy. But doing it in the context of knowing what your organization is it more or less change ready? And if it is more or less change ready, which one of these types of change programs will you go for? If it's power coercive, you probably don't need to build the consensus as much. You don't have time. You got to just go. If the stakes are low, then as you can hold a lot more of these town hall meetings and extract everyone's voice. So it's just more to put it in the context.
So which strategy would have been well suited for the case that we talked about? Because obviously you said power coercive probably wouldn't work. It wasn't well respected. Empirical rational, most people don't really respond to that, especially if you're an hourly.
Yeah, it's probably a combination of the second one. It's more he needed to find a couple disciples who bought into his vision and then started to act a certain way, and then hopefully they were influential enough that they could start people would start to behave that way. The stakes didn't seem that high. I mean, the store's been struggling forever, so it's not like there was some mandate. If you don't get this store turned around in 6 months, we're closing it. And then maybe it's a little bit of this last one, that if the employees were just too content and too complacent, then maybe he essentially needed to start hiring, a new group of people. Maybe he would say, we're going to reorganize the store, and we're going to have, instead of having departments, we're going to have, floor managers, and then I'm going to hire I'm going to reorganize and hire a new floor manager system. So he could have just shook it up a little bit that way. So it probably a combination of 2 and 4. And that's the thing, there's never like one. You can't ever say, oh, this change program has to be power coercive. It's always going to be some sort of elements of all of these probably. And we'll talk about that with what Bob did. So I want to take a break in about 15 to 20 minutes because we have our guest speaker coming in at 8:30. So if it's okay, I'm just going to go ahead and hop into the book and we'll put this in that context. So did anybody read more than just chapter 7, just so I know? Okay, yeah, I mean it's a lot to read, so I wasn't expecting that, but it's a fun read. I mean, this guy, he's simultaneously has a lot of insights, but is also a wild egomaniac. So it's just fun. He's probably a pretty good guy to work for, but he's probably not a good guy to not like work against. If you weren't in his department, you probably were butting heads with him all the time. If you were one of his people, it was probably pretty fun. Just a real quick background, because I figured most of y'all didn't read the book. This is a book about the auto industry. The auto industry reached its glory days after World War II. The baby boom generation reached that driving age. Disposable income went up, so people could afford to buy cars. There was a big Federal Highway Act in 1956 that created the interstate highway system and created federal money for roads. And during that time, these are the real iconic cars. The Mustang was born in the late 50s, early 60s. The Corvette, the Camaro, the Oldsmobile SS, like all these like really fancy cars that that are now being auctioned off at huge prices. They were all designed during this era, and this is actually where the car companies came up with this term called planned obsolescence, where literally they wanted people buying a new car every 3 years. So every 3 years they'd bring out a new design model, and they wanted people to continuously upgrade what they had. And as a little consequence, the manufacturing standards started to falter because these car designers said, well, we're going to have a new Mustang in 3 years, so let's not spend a lot of time on the manufacturing of it because who cares? There'll be a new model out pretty soon. If you go back, say, to 1965, GM was the biggest company in the country, Ford was number 3, and Chrysler was number 6. So, car companies became the biggest companies in the country. Very wealthy, very powerful, big business. And actually, if you were to go look at this in 75, 85, and even 95, they're all in the top 10. General Motors is number 1 a long time. Ford gets up to, I think, number 2 for many years, and Chrysler kind of ping-pongs around. But these are big companies. 1973 changed things. The big oil embargo hit, and then the traditional big block V8 engines became completely impractical, and the automakers started producing these more downsized cars. But they were ugly, they weren't built well, and in the 80s the Japanese came in with Honda and Toyota and all these, Mazda, Nissan, all those guys. They came in and they took a lot of share. And their marketing was more about quality and practicality. And of course, Toyota introduced this manufacturing concept, the Toyota Way, which now everyone is trying to mimic still today. And so the US makers responded by cutting costs. They realized that there's so many parts in a car that if you can save a nickel or save $1 on any one thing, if you're making, 2 million Chevy Impalas, if you can save $1 on the cost of a $30,000 car, $1 would save you $3-4 million. So they realized, oh my gosh, we have this ability to squeeze our suppliers so much that we can really cut cost out. And so very soon, these car companies were dominated by bean counters or finance departments. So Bob Lutz entered GM in 2001 as the vice chairman of product design. He found that the pipeline of design was terrible, that nothing was attractive, that they were not putting up cars that the public wanted, that the automotive journalists were completely panning, and he came from that old era, and so he wanted to instill a little bit more of that design philosophy. But what he found was that the whole company was run by a bunch of spreadsheet jockeys. And every time he tried to push through something, he would be told that either there was a process in place that was preventing that, or that he couldn't put chrome trim around the window because some product manager was going to get a red KPI for a cost overrun. And so the whole book is about him basically fighting like mad against the bean counters. And he goes on all these philosophical diatribes about the good old days and how design shouldn't be run by a spreadsheet. So this book just chronicles that. So back to what we were talking about. Can you guys give some examples of how he employed some strategies that would have fit into these different categories? And if not, that's okay, because this is a new concept, and he never comes right out and says it. But I think empirical rational. I think you could argue that I think there was an episode where he was having a conversation with one of these VLEs, they called it, which is a vehicle line executive, about his KPIs. He was saying, if you put chrome on, I'm gonna go red. And the guy was saying, and Bob was saying, listen, but if you don't, the car's gonna look cheap and no one's gonna buy it. So at the end of the day, what you need to do is produce a car that will sell.
Also on the empirical rational, the ashtray.
Yeah.
Where it was, why is it ejecting that fast?
Yeah.
It's all because of that 40 degrees below Celsius.
In South Dakota. Yeah. So you're trying to inject some common sense where people say, hey, does this really make sense? That's trying to be rational about things. So, that was one case. The behavior one, the normative re-educative. I mean, I really think in many ways he almost did that more than the power one. He would walk around with his little gap measurer, and anywhere he went, he would make a big point of measuring out the gap, and then probably make some big loud, 7 millimeters, yeah, that's what I thought.
He brought in all the interior people constantly for like 4 years in a row, and just like, this is a piece of trash.
Yep.
Sit in the Beamer, now sit in this.
Yep.
Tell me which one you'd rather sit in.
Or the episode where he was out at, I think, the proving grounds, and the big muscular Harley Davidson guy got up in his face because he was making a big stink about the build quality and the gaps. That was one where he was demonstrating some behavior and wanted people to comply, and then that led to the guy saying, oh yeah, our machinists knew they could make this sharp line, but no one had ever asked us for it. How about the power coercive? I mean, there's lots of examples of that, right?
Got rid of two of these sort of fuzzy design hero people who were sitting around an orange beanbag chair doing nothing.
Yeah, and I think there's literally a line in the book where he says, I started progressing designs to production even though they hadn't received the blessing of the planning department. I mean, just completely short-circuited the typical process. That took power. And again, this guy had credibility. He had been the CEO of Chrysler. Chrysler was doing a better job at the time than GM was. He was charismatic. He mentioned he used sense of humor a lot. He would make these sort of outrageous comments and these outrageous jokes, but he would do that on purpose to try to get people to open up to him. So, he was the type of leader that could make this work. And I would argue that this auto company, which was very hierarchical, this fit, right? These people were used to being ordered to do something by someone in a position of authority. He even goes to mention that the company had a bizarre over-reverence for title, that once someone got promoted into a title, then suddenly they became this omnipotent person who wielded this power. But he said these are just people who happen to get promoted, but they have the same insecurities as everybody else. So, obviously he used a lot of the power coercive, but I still would say he certainly had some examples of the normative re-educative. But what about the last one, the environmental adaptive? Are there any examples of him just saying, the heck with the existing structure, I'm going to create something brand new and staff it with my people and see where it takes us? I think early on in the chapter it mentions that he created this interiors group. Right, so he hired this woman who he made it her mission to really change the culture when it came to the cheaply made interiors. And that it chronicles a little bit that she had this never-ending quest to try to upgrade the parts. He even goes to say that people inside the company and outside the company would see her request for something more, and then they would change it back because they said, oh, well, you've never asked for this before. We figured it was a mistake, so we just walked the requirements back. And so he then had to install some other guy to be, I think he called it the knothole. Everything had to go through the knothole because the woman in charge of the interiors was finding that even through her best interest, outside forces were changing things without even letting them know. So then he had to put one other guy in charge to say no decision gets made on this interior until it goes through you. So that was an example of how he just said, this won't work within the existing structure that we have. I have to create a whole separate organization to push this through. What do you guys think about Bob Lutz? Maniac? Just frustrated guy with a big challenge? Was he like Daniel or Oliveira?
Seemed like he just really knew how the GM worked. He could catch the pulse of the department and pull a lever that needed pulling.
Yeah.
Make stuff happen.
He did. He made things happen, that's for sure.
He had the right personality for it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think just anyone could have made those changes.
Mm-hmm.
Bob has a really unique set of skills because he's one of these people that has a sort of intuitive sense of design.
Yep.
You're selling a consumer product that
Yep.
has a good design.
Yep.
And GM was populated by a bunch of people who are like, well, but if we did that, we'd save 15 cents
Yep.
on our stamping costs.
Yep.
Bob said, it doesn't matter if you're saving 15 cents because you're not going to sell a single unit.
Yeah, I
He
mean,
had that sense of design, but he also had this credibility from coming out of turning Chrysler around in the 90s. And so it was a real unique mix.
yeah, I mean, the fallacy in the company was that they just assumed the volume projections were set. So if the volume projections are set, then your incentive is to, lower the price point. But in lowering the price point without knowing it, your volume assumptions are wrong. The more cheaply it's made, the poorly the interior is, then so he had a couple interesting. I literally highlighted a couple of the passages in there. There was one really insightful comment he had. I think he said something like he was surprised at how so many people mistake lack of complaints for customer satisfaction. I mean, in my business, I can't tell you how many fights I have with my plants when we'll go in and we'll see something, we'll see a surface defect, or we'll see something in a part that we know is wrong, and we'll say, hey, what's up with that? And they'll say, no one's been hollering, which is their way of saying they haven't gotten any complaints about it. And you say, yeah, but that's not really the benchmark we should be using, right? He also had some pretty insightful comments about the myth of these process people trying to drive that through non-manufacturing programs like sales and marketing and that type of stuff. I've seen that happen in my company where we instituted a Toyota-like system in the plants and it was really successful, and then they said, oh, we should roll this out to non-manufacturing departments. So the accounting office and the legal office and the sales office, and then of course, as he said, those offices are dependent upon flexibility and adaptability and the more human element. We're not running machines. So I think Duncan's right. This guy has a lot of unique skills and a lot of unique insights. And I'll pick this chapter because when I first read it, I thought, this guy's an a-hole, and he's just going in there, guns blazing, hammering on people, basically belittling people, making fun of people, calling people out, publicly hanging people. And I just thought, you know, it was almost shocking because in today's world, we don't really teach that as being a good strategy. But yet, this wasn't that long ago. This was a while ago. This was 2001 through 2009, so this was, you know, a decade ago. But as I thought about it more, I thought, well, you know what? The conditions were there where this could actually work, and this could actually be a useful strategy. And so I just didn't want to come in here and present this and say, you know, well, this one doesn't really work that well. This one's good but slow, and you know, this one maybe works, but there's, you know, some cost to it. But oh gosh, you know, don't do this one. Like, oh, you know, this one's bad. No, I mean, this one can work. It has to be the right person in the right place, at the right time, but this one can work. If you want to read the rest of the book sometime after the class is over, I really recommended it. I mean, you kind of have to like cars. If you don't like cars, you might find it a little bit boring. But if you like cars or you like learning about challenging business environments, this, I mean, a car company seems like a really tough place to work.
And I feel like he was coaching and teaching people. Some places you go, it's like you're expected to get it right, and if you didn't get it right, you're just gone, and there's nobody coaching at that level.
That's a good point.
So he's bold.
Yeah, Julie.
I think it's interesting. I was reading an article about Mary Bear recently,
Yep.
who took over right
Yep.
after the whole ignition crisis. Just kind of what she's trying to do to change GM. They've acquired that automation arm that's kind of working on their innovation space, and how I guess that's sort of that environmental adaptive, not all the way. They kind of brought them in, to sort of pushing them out to try to help, I guess, bring that positive change forward to GM. And you can really see the leadership that she's provided, but also just the quality of the vehicles has been, I guess, restored sort of back
They're on a roll.
where it was, and that it's kind of back to its glory.
They are. GM is on a roll, and they're being recognized quite a bit for their design work now. The Cadillac ATS and CTS, and then they have, of course, the Corvette. The new Corvette won a lot of praise. They really are. But I have a feeling Mary is not using the same tactics. And you got to remember, he was in a little bit of a unique position. He was much older. He basically was at retirement age, and when you get to be that. And he was wealthy. I mean, you know, he took a payout from Chrysler, and then he became the CEO of this battery company. So I'm sure his bank account was quite good. So when you're in that position, you can kind of say, "Who cares? Like, what are they going to do? Fire me? Okay, that just means I'm going to go relax a lot more and travel a lot more and play a lot more golf." So you know, when you have those conditions, you can be a little bit more of a risk taker because you're not worried about your next job. I think he quite knew that this was going to be his last job, so the consequences for him were a little bit different than you or I would be. Okay, with that, I think we need a break. I really only want to take about 5 minutes, if that's okay, because I think we have our guest speaker out here, and I want to get him in, and again, I want to try to break by 9:30, so can we just take 5 quick minutes?